Hey guys, so welcome back. Welcome to part 3 in this series on this General Electric clock radio. Last time we fixed this clock. It's been running for several days. It's keeping very good time. And so I'm going to be able to disconnect it now, get it out of the way, and as you can see, it's making no noise whatsoever. I've got the chassis back out. I failed to remind everybody about how bad the speaker looks. I'm going to be honest with you, this thing sounds okay. I'm going to leave it alone. You can see this thing is kind of a basket case anyway. If this thing will play, I'm just going to leave it be. I can always go back in there and do that speaker, but what we need to do is go back and get the rest of this fixed. I didn't really do much more than get this thing to play last time. So if we pull up what our to-do list is, I'll put it up here on the screen. But basically I need to reinstall a power cord in here. That's simple. Check for silver mica disease. I've had this playing for quite a while. I didn't see any develop, and so I think we're out of the woods on that. Reconnect the motor. Of course, we'll put that in at the end. Got a couple of safety capacitors to put in. I need to clean the volume control, replace the remaining paper caps that are in here. I'll do some cleanup. I'm not going to do much in the way of restoration on this thing, but you can see I've still got some paper caps in here to do. I'm not going to do the speaker replacement at this time, and then just finish doing the rewiring, put the thermistor, the fuse in here that I'm going to put, and then we'll get this thing put back together and see how it works. Put the clock through its paces, see about putting power through it. We'll see what happens. So anyway, that's what we're going to do in part 3. Hang on, we're going to get started. So one of the things that I've done, I did this off camera because it's hard to see around my head. We have this broken part right here in the cabinet, and this is part of my decision to not do a whole lot more with the speaker and everything. If you look in this cabinet very closely, you'll see that this isn't just dirty. There's melted places, looks like chemical melt in some areas. I believe this is not brown model, I believe this is mahogany model. So we'll go back and look at that, but it's pretty neat otherwise, but it's missing a chunk. I really can't do much about that. And it's got lots of cracks in it. So one of the things that I did do was I'm going to probably put some epoxy in here to keep this crack from getting any worse. But what I've done is I've experimented with going ahead and creating basically like a tack weld. I do welding too. And one of the things that you do when you're welding up things is you'll get things positioned and you'll do a tack weld to hold it in position before you come along and really buzz along the line and put the rest of the weld in. So what I did was I experimented with Bondic. I did some of this in a previous video, and I just created a spot glue right here. It was easy to do because you just put it on there, do the ultraviolet, and it hardens pretty quickly. And so that allowed me to do is tack this so this won't move, and I've got it lined up pretty well. I've started going in and basically scraping away what used to be some kind of glue product that somebody tried to put in there a while back just to kind of smooth all that off. And I can try to epoxy this shut, but you can see kind of the way the light is right there. There's actually a lot of material missing there. It's not just a crack. It's like it's created like a canyon, right along the edge here. I don't know how that happened, but basically I can get this to come together, but it's always going to be open there. So then, if this was wood or something, you could put some filler in there and sand it smooth and all that. That's never going to look right on this. So what I think what I'm going to do is just epoxy that up, shine this up as best I can. I'm going to do something to stop this crack from going any further, and I'm going to call the cabinet is what the cabinet is. This is just not going to be more than what you see here, basically. How could it be? So anyway, I'm going to get that done. You don't need to see me epoxy stuff, but that's what's going to happen with the cabinet. Next time you see this, that'll be done. This will be cleaned off as best as possible. I'll get the rest of the bug carcass parts out of here, and that's all there is going to be for this case. So I'll get that done, and I'll bring you back to the next step, which is going to be getting back onto the chassis. Okay, so we're ready to get into doing the capacitor work on here. Don't worry, I'm not going to be videoing this for you to look at. I just want to show you the before and after. So these are the two safety, well, these will be safety capacitors that are going in here. This is an across the line cap, and this is one that goes from one of the lines to the chassis. So this will be replaced with an X type, because X for across, right? And then this will be a Y. So I'm going to have an X2 and a Y2 here. And I have them both. These are the ones I'm going to use. There may be other examples you guys like to use, that's fine. This is what I'm going to use. And then the other two is this one here and this one here. So I've got them pulled, ready to go. I'm going to go get that all done. Because of these weird tube sockets they have on here, okay, I guess I could pull these little donuts up to get it. I'm not going to do it. This is not that kind of radio. I am going to be doing J-hooking all over the place. So that's going to be the plan. Let me get that in, and then when I bring you back, I hope to have all the capacitors in, and then we'll be talking about putting the power line and the fuse in. So hang on, in just a moment you'll see that done. And by the way, let's see what we have here. This has been running for over a week, and I have left it running, but I'm going to disconnect it now, because what I'm going to do is check to make sure the radio is still working. So as I change capacitors, I'll keep checking it. I'm not going to show that to you, but that's how I work. Okay, but you can see the time that's on here. Let's see what we're getting up to. So what do you say that is? 3:40. What do you think? Would you say it's close to 3:48? That's after a week. So I think that's pretty darned good. And it should be, because it's running at 60 hertz. It's running right off of the power line. So it ought to be very, very accurate. So anyway, on to the capacitor work. So it's, I haven't done the other capacitors yet, but you can hear it's working at this point. I haven't had this playing for quite a long time. All right, so I'll take care of the capacitors. Bring them back when I'm done. By the way, I've already done the cleaning of the volume control. Okay, just because I thought you guys would be interested. I was cutting out this capacitor right here, which is the across the line capacitor, this guy right here. Okay, that's this fella right here. So I made this cut right here, and I was bending it down to cut the other side. I just thought you'd like to see that. Oh, look, it just fell off. So this capacitor goes straight across neutral and hot. So there you go. Royal Tiger. All right. Okay, I've got about ready to put the new plug in, the new cord rather. I have drilled a hole, mounted a fuse holder right here, and that'll go in. I'm getting this done before I finish doing this last capacitor right here, kind of so I can get into this area here and do whatever I needed to do. And meanwhile, I've replaced the two. There's one safety capacitor, there's the other safety capacitor down there. I've done this capacitor here, and this is literally the last one. It's I think it's a tone capacitor near the audio output tube. So anyway, that's where we are, and I'm going to put this in and also put in a CL90. Okay, so I got the capacitors all changed out. I got a new power cord put in. I've got the strain relief in. It's a polarized cord. Hot lead goes to the fuse, CL90. Then it goes to the switch on the clock. So once again, we have the hot goes to the switch first. I put in a 375 milliamp fuse in here. The most current I saw was about 200 milliamps. We may get an inrush, but the CL90 will protect us from that. So I think it's good to go. I'm just going to make sure that everything works okay, and the next thing we should be doing will be just checking the alignment. Okay, so I'd like to point out the noise from my lights. There's a light right here.
Seems like a big waste of time. Time suck.
Gary, listen, it's a great question. I would refer.
I can't say ongoing investigation. I can't. It wasn't I can't. It's I won't.
Okay, so I was getting set up to do the alignment, and I got to thinking about a couple of things. One of them is that this is an All-American 5 radio. You don't need to see another alignment in All-American 5, so I'm going to go get it done. If something weird happens, I'll let you know, but otherwise I'm just going to get that behind us. But while I was doing the setup for this, I got to thinking about this fuse I put in down here. I was basing this upon the current draw of the radio, and I said, okay, I've only pulled about 200 milliamps, so I'll put in a 375. And I got to thinking about, well, what about this, right? This thing is going to be rated for 1100 watts. So if anybody plugs in anything to this, and then granted, nobody else is going to ever own this but me, right? But, you know, that would be a 10 amp. So I think what I may have to do is put a 10 amp fuse down here, which is not going to give me a whole lot of comfort for not destroying the radio if something goes wrong there. But I think what I can do is that this little wire right here that goes between the plug and the switch for turning on and off the deal is right here. Okay, I can put a fuse here that will be the fuse for the radio, but I can still have a 10 amp fuse for protection of this, and that 10 amp fuse I've put in is right here. It's on this black lead that comes down towards the motor. So I have a 10 amp here that will provide protection for this plug, but then between here and here I'll have a smaller one that will protect the radio. That's probably going to be doing most of the work anyway. So I think I've got something I can put in there. What did I do with it? I think I'll do is just put one of these little holders in and just wire it up in here, and that'll give me some fuse protection for the radio without having to rely on a 10 amp fuse to protect the radio. Okay, I'm going to get that in, and I'm going to do the alignment and bring it back when I'm done. I'm probably going to also, I was listening to the speaker. Now, you look at the speaker and you realize it's something that's not great about that speaker. I think what I'm going to do when I do the alignment is I'm going to disconnect that speaker and use a shop speaker I have just to make sure I have a clean signal that I'm using for doing my alignments, and then I'll put this speaker back on if it doesn't annoy me too much by then. So anyway, going to get under that and bring it back.
A prosecutor fired, which he did successfully.
Okay, a decent speaker makes a big difference. And that means I'm going to do something about this speaker, maybe someday, but not at this time. I'm just going to use this for this in the ball game in the shop.
And anyway, no matter how you slice this, Hunter Biden's involvement, Hunter continued to get paid.
So, how many Astro-type hats do you have?
Is sponsored by Irish Spring, the fresh scent of Irish Spring.
Okay, so I've got the alignment done, and I think it sounds pretty good.
You need to own longer days. So just think of that.
It'll vary depending on how I have the antenna turned. I've also got it wired up temporarily with a clock. It's on sleep, so in a minute we may find this thing shuts off, and that'll be interesting. But anyway, one of the things that I noticed while I was doing the alignment, I got to thinking about this, and I think I made a mistake that I've corrected already. I'll show it to you in a minute after the radio shuts off. So basically, I was talking earlier about putting in a 10 amp fuse, which I've done. I replaced the fuse that's here with a 10 amp, and then I was talking about putting in a smaller one. It ends up being a half amp right here. But one of the things I had done before was I had put the thermistor, the CL90, next to that fuse block, which is over here. So that means the CL90 is really only doing good when I first plug this thing in to power the clock. But it would already have gone through its negative temperature coefficient and no longer providing inrush current when this thing clicks on and then it starts to power the tubes. So what I've done is I've moved the CL90 from being on that fuse block with the 10 amp, and I moved it over to basically this position on the switch. So now the CL90 is here. So when it plugs in, it just runs the clock. When the clock clicks, if there's an appliance here, then fine. But if the radio is turned on, then at that point the CL90 will then provide protection for the for the inrush on the tubes, and also lower the voltage for the tubes. I don't really need to do that for here, I don't think. So another thing I want to clarify on here, after I did this, I started thinking how to make a better drawing of this to show what we're doing here. So what I've done is I've gone in there to draw in what we had, and I need to add some additional information I'm going to talk about right here. Probably one of the best things you need to do when you're doing a rewiring of these things is to, this is the way I do it, is look for where your chassis is, okay? So here is where the chassis is, and it's separated from the floating ground by this Y2 capacitor, okay? So this is your floating ground. They call it the B- bus here, which is nice. As you see, it comes on over here, and this is where the negative side of these capacitors are tied, and it comes down to here. And so really this needs to be where your neutral is going to tie. You want your neutral to go to the floating ground. And it's helpful to draw this one out because this one gets kind of confusing with the switches around the clock motor. So as I say, start from here, find where your floating ground is, bring it back. This is just how I do it. You do it your way. And so the neutral is going to need to come from here. That means that this needs to be your hot lead. Okay. Now if I bring the hot lead back, then that makes the hot miss all of this going on in here. And I looked at, is there a way I could maybe put a 10 amp fuse here? Not really. It gets too complicated with the switch. So what I found the best thing to do is that I want to swap these two here, and you'll see how that works. So let's follow the neutral first. You'll see it comes back here, goes past cross-line capacitor, no big deal, it's not polarized. Comes here, comes over to here, that's removed, comes over here, and then it runs on and it becomes your neutral, which then also feeds the neutral return on the clock motor. Okay, now let's follow the hot then. The hot comes in here, comes in, it goes to where we had that first fuse, fuse 1, which is a 10 amp fuse, here. Then it comes down and runs the clock motor. When the timer switches on, then the hot comes to here. It comes here and it feeds the other side of the appliance outlet. Then, if it's going to power the radio because the switch is closed, then it goes through fuse 2, which is a half amp. Then, once it goes past the switch, that's where we have the thermistor set. So I have the thermistor here, and then it comes here, and then this is removed between here and here, and instead this comes up and jumps over to here, and then this continues on this side of the cross-line capacitor into what is the hot circuit, which then leads just into the rectifier. Okay, so that way we've got it to where your floating ground isn't tied to hot. Because if you didn't do it this way, you'd get hot here, which then could come up here and be on your floating ground, which is not where you want it to be.
Because you don't do it all day, but they do. 713-489-7433.
I'll play with this a little bit while I wait for this to tell me I should be asleep.
7433.
Going abroad for the first time.
Hey, because you're in a very good spot. That's what I love about the simplicity of this whole thing.
It's meant behind her.
Well, I would say that would make Helen a My Bladder superstar for sure.
Another thing that I did was I cleaned up this quite a bit. I don't know how well you can see that, but I also went in with a lacquer stick and freshened up the numbers that are on here to make it a little bit easier to read. I think it turned out looking pretty good. And of course, you know, I don't get real good reception inside the shop here. We normally go outside somewhere.
Chất lượng quá hay là sai liền.
We'll do a better band scan when we get outdoors.
The red line didn't touch the green line.
And I think you got to admit, it's pretty amazing how the speaker sounds. I have found in my junk pins, it says speakers I bought a while back, and this one is the same size. It's a 4 ohm speaker. It'll fit in there. The problem is that it's missing the mounting that's just spot welded to the other frame. So I'm probably not going to be able to use this. But as it is, it's playing okay. I'm satisfied with it. I'm not listening to rock and roll on it, so for listening to the ball game, I think it's fine.
He said, this was early in the show, he said, no surprise that Ken Harmon at Ormberger are talking in detail about Djokovic versus Alcaraz's 5-set epic effort.
But when we do recover from those crashes and the markets get rolling again, we tend to have one or two really, really great years in the market. Now, those poor people.
So this nerve, it's responsible for telling your urethra, and that's the tube that...
I don't want to hear about that.
You get those same couple of good years that the markets do. The bounce
You just lost me.
But we didn't lose anything to get it. So
All right, I'm going to let this play for a while until this clicks off, and then I'll edit it to where it's right before it cuts off, and then you'll hear it cut off. So, meanwhile, I'm going to find some sports news to listen to. I'm going to listen to news about my urethra.
He's got a nice home.
Right.
In location undisclosed.
Well, though, all of the Olympics, or I shouldn't say all of the Olympics, but I tune in.
So you're looking here.
But I'm more and more disillusioned by it because there's this, to be perfectly frank with you, like...
So it works. Saw this kick out, and that separated everything, and the radio is off. So that works out okay.
During the Omaha Steaks anniversary sale.
Okay, so the switch worked fine, and now I'm going to go through and talk about that those points that we were talking about when we moved the fuse and added a fuse and all of that good stuff. So I'm going to kind of go through what we did here. So here's the power cord comes in, the hot lead comes down, and the first thing it does is hit a fuse. This is a 10 amp fuse that's in there. So if we refer back to this, we come in on the hot lead, and we hit F1, which is a 10 amp fuse, and then we go to the motor. So it comes up here, and then this lead here goes off and goes to the clock, and it comes back from the clock when the switch closes. It says turn on the coffee pot or turn on the radio, and it comes back on this white line. Okay, and I've got those jumpered by this red lead here because I don't have the clock connected. So it comes back to here, and then that provides power to the outlet that comes out. Okay, this is that two-pronged outlet that was here. So that brings it, okay, comes in, goes to fuse 1, comes to the motor, runs the motor, comes over the switch, comes back on the yellow line, and it comes to that leg of the outlet. Then it goes through F2 to get to the switch. So here's where we were, and we come out on that fuse that we installed. This is F2. I've got a 1/2 amp fuse in here, and then it comes from here and comes over to the switch. Right, and this is the switch that says, okay, when the coffee's, when the coffee pot's running or whatever, then either want it on, the radio on or off. Okay, so this is where it comes in. The out of the switch is right down below here. It comes out and goes into the CL90. So as we mentioned, we went, here's the fuse, we went to the switch, and then we put the CL90 here. And then what we do is jump over and go over to the hot lead that goes to the rectifier 4 and 5. So that comes down here, it runs down this black line here, comes to here, and that is 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and then 5 is right here is where it comes out, and then that's also where we have tied on the X2 safety capacitor. So we come into here, we go into the rectifier, as we just mentioned, 4 and 5, and then we hit also the, we went this way, and we're now on this side of the across the line capacitor, the X2. Okay. So then we're to the hot side. Okay, now let's look at the neutral side. The neutral side comes in, get focused. This was the hot, so the neutral comes up, comes this way, and goes first to the outlet, the appliance outlet, which is what it does here. Okay. There's also needs to be a lead that runs off to provide the neutral return to the motor. Okay, so here's where it comes in. This black line right here runs off and goes to the neutral return that just causes the motor to run. Okay, but this is where the neutral comes in to provide the neutral return for the appliance outlet that's rated for 10 amps. Okay. All right, now from here, there's a lead that's back behind here, right here. This one right here. That comes off and runs down to here, and that's tied onto the B negative. Okay, and that B negative comes off over here, and it's on the other side of the X2, and then it comes up and it goes to the Y2 safety capacitor. Okay, so it's come up over here, goes this way, goes past this way, comes to neutral, comes up as part of the B negative here, and then runs over the Y2 capacitor to ground. Okay, so that's the floating ground, and it comes back over to here. So there's the wiring. I've done the testing on it. Works fine. The current draw is about it's about 0.2, 0.25. It's somewhere around in there in terms of the amps when I was able to measure it earlier, and seems to be doing fine. So this half amp is fine. I think the 10 amp here will be fine, and I think this is good to go. Let's go work on the cabinet. Okay, so I applied some plastic epoxy on the inside of this to stop these cracks that are in here. I did the Bondic to hold it in place and then followed up a little bit later. It's very sticky stuff, and it'll end up looking like this. I should have smeared it out a little bit better, but it's sandable, so I'm going to be doing some sanding, as you see here. I did find that I missed another crack right up here, so when I get done with this I'll do a good job of smearing that smooth to stop that one from going anywhere. But meanwhile, I'm just going to get this thing sanded, and I don't have to do much, just enough to get it to where it looks a little better. So I'll get this done and I'll bring you back. I'll probably wash this out with some water. I think it's waterproof. And or alcohol. And I think that's good enough. Now I'll polish up the outside some, but that's made that reasonably rigid. I'm sure I break it if I pushed on it. But you know, that's enough of that. So that's not going to get the major spots out. In order to do that, I'd probably have to wet sand this. I'm not going to do it. I'm just trying to get most of the haziness and dirt and scratches off. Then when I follow up with Novus 2, I think it'll look okay. Unfortunately, there's not much I can do for where they used some kind of glue that melted the surface in other places. I mean, the only real solution to this probably would be to wet sand it, which is, there's no point doing it on this one. But there's no excuse for it to not be clean, so I'll get off as much as we can. I'll bring you back after I finish getting this cleaned off. See how it looks. Okay, so we got the case done. We got the patching done on the other side and got this all finished up, and I think we're done about all we're going to do in the case. I think this looks okay. Like I said, I have to wet sand it to get rid of all the other things. This has got part of the plastic removed, and there's like crevice through here, but it's not going to break out any further, and it looks okay. Give you a good idea though of what this case looked like when it was new, and I think it's pretty cool looking actually. So I think we're about ready to go back in and start putting this thing back in the case and see how it looks. So let's go see.
That outdoor kitchen system paper.
Okay, so I got terminations hooked up for each of the wires, and the way they're wired is they can't be hooked up backwards. So this one has got the female on this side, this one has the male on this side, and this one's a completely different type of connector. And and this is the neutral line that comes back, that goes to the clock motor as well. So I had to use this kind of connector so it could get through this hole, but I want to make it to where I can disconnect it rather than make it, you know, soldered onto here, so I have to keep cutting the leads every time, because this chassis has to come out the back of the chassis, of the case, and this has to go out the front of the case, so something's got to give. So I put in some connectors for the future. Okay, we're going back into the box. Last look at that beautiful, beautiful speaker. And hey,
You're in the making people happy business.
who would have thought it would work?
Classic Chevy Sugarland, classic Elite Chevy Highway 6.
Their voice. AM 700 KSEV.
I have to retract this. Go ahead and get a little bit engaged in the gears to hold it out of the way. And then this will eventually fish its way in. I'm sure there's a simple way to do this, and if I knew what it was, I would just tell you. There's a couple of parts that have to be rotated in the right position to drop in, and then you get it in position, and you turn it as it needs to be. I think I got it finally. There we go. That's it. Just be patient, you'll get it. Okay, clock is in. Okay, now the clock is held in place by these three posts, here, here, and here, reacting against the shield here. So this is basically the nut that holds it against the face of the clock. All right, let's get this done. Big one in first. Cool. Second biggest one next. And the smallest one last. All right. Okay, clock is in. Clock is in. Let's get ready to put the chassis in. Clear some space. Okay, before I put the chassis back in the case, I'm going to put this plate back on the bottom of the chassis. And I thought that'd be a good place to attach a repairer's note on here for somebody who might come along later to see, well, what happened here, or what did I do, and so forth. So I've made a little note here. I basically said that I did the repair in June, July of 2023. Replaced the filter caps, output tube coupling cap, all the paper caps. I used 2 safety caps, X2 and a Y2, polarized line cord, added 2 fuses in the values of 10 amp and a half amp. I serviced the clock by lubricating it. I also serviced the Telechron rotor by flushing it, adding 1 milliliter of clock oil, and soldered it shut and repaired the case. So I'm going to put this inside of here. Then I'm going to use some tape, as they did, just kind of hold this in place as I insert this into the chassis, or into the case, rather. So let me get this taped on here, and then we'll get back to that point in just a sec. Okay, so let's get the correct cables hooked up. It's not hard to guess how they need to go. They will only go together the correct way. Okay. Okay, we're going to plug this thing in and see, make sure it still works. Okay. Okay, it's on. Here it comes.
Nothing as we start the home 8th inning. Ryan Stanek, who threw 2/3 of a scoreless inning yesterday for the Astros. Stanek 2-1, 4.83 ERA, 34 games, 31 2/3 innings, 30 hits, 19.
Well, these loop antennas are obviously directional.
Doyle leads it off. First pitch to him, and Doyle can't hold up on a slider away, and it's strike one. Doyle grounded out in the 3rd, walked in the 6th. Bregman even with 3rd. Doyle with excellent speed. Abreu a couple of steps behind the bag at 1st. Here's the 0-1. Fastball misses outside at 98, and it's a ball into strike. Pitch on the way. Ground ball softly hit right side to his left. Dubon. Fields throws to 1st. And there's one out. Brandon Bielak started through 7 scoreless innings against the Rockies in Houston earlier this month. 5 2/3 scoreless today, allowed just 1 hit. Rockies still only have 1 hit in this game. Phil Maton struck out the only batter he faced, Telechron, with 2 men on in the 6th. And Rafael Montero with a scoreless 7 worked.
Okay guys, here we are back out at the park where I normally come to bring stuff to see how it receives away from the shop and back at the house a few miles down the road, and just to get out and hear how it would play with good reception. Alright, so one of the things I want to do before I get started is I want to show you something around the back. So the back of the radio, if you remember from the first episode, this has an outlet for an appliance. I'm going to plug in an appliance. Now one of the things that they advertise about this is, because it's the most useful radio in the world, is that you can use this to have it in your kitchen, let's say, and turn on an appliance like a coffee pot. So I've got a coffee pot here, and we'll talk about it in a minute. I'm going to plug in, and it's plugged in. It's from about the same generation as this radio, so they kind of go together. And what I'm going to do is I've got this set to wake up, and we'll wait until the alarm kicks in. It should be any minute now, and then we'll talk about the radio. So I'm going to speed this up until it switches on, and then we'll talk about it. Just heard it click. So now we got power going both to the coffee pot and to start warming up the tubes in the radio. Should be seeing the coffee pot starting to percolate here pretty soon. I hear it. And we're getting coffee percolating up here. And off it goes.
This is all in the redacted FD 1023.
So we got the radio playing now.
Quarter pounder. What if I go to an Italian restaurant that includes this?
Okay, first before we go through and talk about this much more, I want to make a couple of comments. One of them might be is, you remember from the first part of this series on this radio of how busted up the case was and full of bug guts and all kinds of stuff, and how bad the speaker looked. And you're thinking, why would anybody do this kind of work on this radio? Well, it could be for a number of reasons. One of them might be is for sentimental reasons. The fellow who showed us how to do the work on this radioactive clock, Wardco, he did this because his grandmother had one that looked just like this. And, you know, Ward's about my age, I guess. So it gives you an idea of, he was a kid in the 50s. And he remembered his grandmom had one of these, and he always wanted one. So he got one that looked like it, or maybe it was hers, handed down, but it needed work, and it didn't work anymore. And so he took that as a challenge to get that back to working again. So it could be for a completely valid, nostalgic reason that you want to do this. You may have your own. Another reason might be is if you have something like this and you're thinking, oh, this thing's so busted up, it's not worth working on, it's not worth doing. Well, ask yourself, well, if it worked and it didn't look terrible, would you not want to have it? I think this doesn't look terrible anymore. If I didn't show you the missing piece of plastic in the back, it would look okay. If you had this up on a shelf and it was running, and if you wanted to have a radium clock in your house, I mean, you would have it and it would work. And so, I mean,
You fill up a line of card?
so I mean, yes, it's got some bit of paint missing here. I might try to touch that up someday if I wasn't going to just leave this in my garage as my shop clock. But my point is that, you know, you might want to fix this up or see, you know, it's like it can be done. You can fix this clock up. It looks good, and if you don't point out its flaws, it looks really good. And if you want to point out the flaws, yeah, it's got battle scars. Okay, it's 70 years old. It's 72 years old. So anyway, I just thought I'd point that out. That's why somebody might do that. And meanwhile, we got our coffee brewing here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through the bands and see how we do. I think I mentioned, or maybe I didn't, I think I've been struggling with the model number of this radio. It's actually a 512F, and I know that because of the case color, but this is brown with gold lettering on it. So this is a 512, which is a mahogany model. M-O-T-T-L-E. That's what this version is. So I'm going to go back through the other two and correct the titles of what part number it is. It'll still say the other numbers in the video. I'm not going to redo the video, but the model number on the titles I'll fix, and on the playlist. Okay, we'll go through and see how this thing sounds out here in the away from everything.
Let's go arbitration route. So that's just a process.
Okay, there's a station that I can't pick up back at the house in the shop.
And
KILT. This one is strong.
Right, for any people, the seniors, to have to make mortgage payments if they can avoid it. And
that's a very strong station nearby.
To commit to $11 a month.
It's KTRH. Used to be a Clear Channel station. I don't think it is anymore.
The letter T, the number.
What? Financial
It's a sports talk radio.
Correct.
Some DX stations in there somewhere.
Got to do things differently. And you know that old expression, the
indictment against Donald Trump and others for their alleged role in the
cái sự sản xuất của dưỡng chất NGF tạm dịch.
So yeah, it's an all-American 5. It'd be nice if it had an RF amplifier tube in it, but it doesn't. It's a nice little radio. It's from 1951, and I think it's held up pretty good over the years. We got the clock fixed to where it doesn't make any noise whatsoever. If you tune in on the clock, you don't hear anything going on that unless you bring a sensitive microphone in all the way to listen to it. So what else do we have to do on this clock? Well, in the first episode we went through and kind of diagnosed it, but the idea is that we wanted to make sure the clock could at least work somewhat before we went in to do a lot more work on it. We found out in the first episode that the clock was making a lot of grinding noises, and so the concern there is hey, if we're going to stop this project, let's stop early. Okay, let's don't do a lot of work on it before we find out if it's really going to be something we can salvage. So the first thing what we did is quickly did a few things in the radio side, diagnosed a few problems, just, you know, replaced the filter capacitors. I put in a new coupling capacitor before the audio output tube, and got it to where it was making noise. It was a bit distorted, but it was making some noise. And we said, okay, we're confident we can get the radio to work. You know, the output transformer is working, the oscillator is working. Anything else we can probably fix. So then we went into the clock. And the clock in part 2, we went to a lot of effort to take the clock apart. We got in there to the rotor. We followed Wardco's examples of how he addressed this, drilled a hole in it, flushed out any old lubricant that was in there, replaced it with some clock oil, and soldered a cap in there, which was a bit of a different approach that a commenter on Wardco's channel had suggested, and soldered that over to seal the oil inside. Then we lubricated the rest of the clock, put it back together, worked on the points and the mechanism and so forth, and got this all to work. And so we put that back in the case, and then we went and did the rest of the electrical restoration on this. We put in safety capacitors, replaced the paper capacitors, we put on a new polarized plug. I put in fuses, a 1/2 amp to protect the radio, a 10 amp to protect the outlet that goes out here to an appliance. We put in a thermistor to help limit inrush into this so that we don't pop too high of a voltage too quickly on these tubes. It'll make them last longer. And so we're able to do that, and I think the results have turned out pretty well. So with that, I think I'm going to say, folks, I appreciate y'all watching this 3-part series on this old radio, and hope you enjoyed going through and looking at some of this old technology and how this stuff all worked. But I'll say one more thing about the part about nostalgia. This coffee pot belonged to my grandparents. It's from the 50s or the 60s. I remember it all my life when going to visit them, and to have these two together is kind of special for me. And if you had never seen a percolator work, then that's how a percolator works. So it's kind of neat to tie this all together. I tell you, it's 100 degrees out here right now, and I'm going to have a cup of coffee here in a minute, just to hopefully you guys can join me. Anyway, appreciate you guys watching, and thanks for all the kind comments. Appreciate it. And I think my coffee is ready. So if you want to join me for a sip, you're welcome to do so. Otherwise, guys, I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye. Man, coffee's hot out of a percolator. Whew. You forget this getting Keurigs and drip coffee makers, The whole pot gets hot. And it's hot coffee. That's good.
Isn't a catchphrase, it's a culture. And the ones who help make sure everyone makes it home safe. For the safety-minded who watch everyone's backs, Grainger offers supplies and solutions for every industry, as well as safety assessments and training to keep your facility safe and your people safer. Call, click.
He almost never has. That's what seemed like it got talked about more than his unbelievable backflip. That was one of the